Hello and welcome back. We are going to be continuing our Victoria 3 tutorial series, and we are going to be doing an updated tier list for the society text for patch 1.5. We haven't done this since patch 1.2. A bit has changed. There is the introduction of some new texts, the ones that give corporations, and that one was corporate charters, and so we are going to be ranking these and talking about these. For this video, we are going to first talk about some background ideas that are necessary to kind of understand how we are ranking the text, and then we're going to get into the tier 1 text, and then the tier 2 text. So starting out, talking about some background ideas, the first thing we are going to be talking about is the way we are evaluating all these texts is you're going to get all the texts eventually, and so the way we are evaluating it is not on how good the tech is, but how researchable it is, in the sense that right when you can research it, are you researching it? The stuff that is just high priority is going to be, S tier, and the stuff that's low priority is going to be much lower. So for example, shift work is a tech that has suffered a lot in patch 1.5 because you don't push throughput really early, and so the economies of scale building cap, generally speaking, you won't be able to make use of it with most countries right when you can research shift work. However, it's an incredibly strong tech, you just don't research it immediately. The society tech is full of these techs where they're not going to be very important recently, and what has really changed from 1.5 to 1.2, talking about society techs, is you pass laws a lot slower, and so unlocking the ability to pass particular laws is going to vary greatly, in terms of what your situation is from country to country, and if you need more laws, useful laws to pass, and if you don't need more useful laws to pass, like let's say we maybe want to go colonialism, but we have to get, off of traditionalism first, something like this heavily deprioritizes this. So for society tech in particular, a lot of their, stuff is going to be heavily polarized. It's either going to be, it's like conditional S tier, or it's going to be like C or D tier. Stuff's either going to be really high priority if you want to and can pass the laws, but if you have other laws to pass, a lot of the times you're just going to like deprioritize that. So that's kind of things talking about society tech in particular, and our emphasis on, a prioritization view of things, not a power level look of research. Also, very importantly, in the early stages of the game, you will not want to go ahead of time, and so this to some extent informs strategy. What I mean by ahead of time is, if we have tier 1 techs left unresearched, normally a tier 2 tech was going to cost 10k research. If we have tier 1 techs left unresearched, this will increase the cost of the tech by like 2,500, I think is the number, and so what you generally want to do in the early game, before you build a ton of universities, is you want to research all the tier 1 techs, and then research the tier 2 techs. This strategy changes once you leave the early game, but in the early game, this is often how you're going to view things, and so there's going to be kind of weird breakpoints where you are letting, the inferior tier 1 techs nat spread to you, and instead, working on other techs and other spheres, and then as soon as the tier 1, the last of the tier 1 techs that you didn't research because it's not very good, as soon as this becomes available, then you unlock kind of all the tier 2 techs, and so this is generally how you go about things, and so this means that all the tier 2 techs are going to kind of compete with each other for slots, and they're also competing with other techs, and so this is another consideration. So some things lose out in prioritization because they are competing with other trees. When you can research them, how likely are you to research them? So this is kind of how we're evaluating it, and so without further ado, actually with one further ado, let's get into it. We don't have urban planning on this tier list. This is a tech that would actually be kind of pseudo S tier, mainly because it unlocks the very, very efficient iron frame building. So if you are if you're playing a country that actually has iron, but well, actually, even if you don't have iron, I think you actually just import iron and use iron frame buildings. And also, the market squares is a huge upgrade on your urban centers, although any country that doesn't start out with this won't really have very many urban centers, so it's maybe not a big deal. But this is S or A tier, but we're not going to have it in our tier list because almost everyone starts with it. Okay, so let's jump back into our tier list and kind of get off and away on our rankings. So we're going to start with the tier 1 techs. Academia is one that's a little bit hard to rank. It's going to give 0.5% wealth education access. It's also going to unlock universities. However, for the most part, on almost anyone, you're going to be looking to ramp up construction. And so the only reason you would really want this, university is for the qualifications reasons. However, in patch 1.5, and my sample size is small on this on backward countries that start with really low literacy, it seems to be the case that sometimes maybe it's going to be that building one university for that plus 10% qualifications is going to make a huge difference in getting stuff to be able to employ up. And so this is going to be a heavy priority if you can't get places to employ up, in the very, very early game, and you will want to get started, on the universities. Again, this is for a very small portion of countries that I don't have an enormous sample size on. So like these first five, techs, I'm not very confident in my placement, but we are going to put academia in A tier. Next up is law enforcement. You are going to have a ton of laws that you need to pass other than dedicated police force. If you are playing any country that doesn't start with law enforcement, and maybe it's kind of okay, but you're going to have other techs you want to research really, really badly instead of this. And so we're going to put this pretty squarely in D tier. Next up, we have international trade. It unlocks laissez-faire. It's kind of okay, but we're not going to rate it very highly because there's so many other techs you want to be researching if you're this far backward. Namely, you're going to emphasize more the production techs if you are starting out with the really, really bad tech tree where you don't have international trade research. So we're just going to put this at the head of D tier where it's not an insane one. Like, we can jump in back into the scene and talk about that and centralization, which is what we're like taking a look at. Trade agreements, getting those early is kind of okay, but like customs union, if you have a strategy that really, really requires a customs union, maybe there's some countries that you're going to want to go international trade very intentionally just to try and get the trade agreement plus customs union type stuff, but it's really not going to move the needle. I think one you are more likely to research if you don't start with it, which almost every country starts with it, is centralization, because it's going to give you the ability to use filing cabinets, but more importantly, road maintenance is a decree that's really good in early game. 10% state construction efficiency is very, very strong, especially if you don't have a lot of construction sectors, and this is being one of the edicts that's really, really strong in the early game, as well as if you are this backward, you are probably going to have infrastructure problems. This is also another reason why urban planning is okay, because it gives more infra from pops, but if you're having infra problems on top of this, it's going to be a really valuable one, allowing you to construct in kind of some of your better states. But again, this is on a very small share of countries, and so we don't necessarily need to look at it too closely. And then international relations is just trashed here because alliances, defensive pacts, and I guess rivalries are kind of okay, but these are just like not very useful things. I don't think you ever research international relations kind of ever. And so we're going to put that at the very bottom of D tier. So coming back into the browser, let's, get our placement going after kind of talking through these. We are going to put centralization kind of in the middle of C tier. We're going to put international relations at the very back of D tier, at the very, very back. And now we're left with mass communications. This gives 10% authority. It's not worth like researching actively, I don't think, and it doesn't really lead into anything, if my recollection is correct, lead into anything too crazy. So on the mass communications, mass comms, it leads into, nationalism, which for some countries you're going to want to research nationalism for unification purposes, but I think all those countries start with mass comm and also would rather research other stuff first. And then it's also leading into labor movements, but you're not going to go labor movements super, super early, and you're going to go egalitarianism like first before you would go mass comm. So egalitarianism just kind of being better in a lot of senses. We're going to come back to it. So mass comm's not going to be that good. Medical degrees does lead into pharmaceuticals though, so let's kind of jump back into the browser and take a closer look at these and get them sorted. But for mass comms, we are going to put it in the D tier. We're going to put it at the top of D tier. For situations like you maybe research it like in some instances when you want to get nationalism a little bit faster, but I really don't think. Yeah, we're just going to put it in D tier. It's not going to move the needle. Medical degrees, however, will move the needle a little bit because it will allow you to get pharmaceuticals later down the road. So you research this because it's instrumentally useful. Also, sometimes charity hospitals, well, they're not as good. Actually, I just don't think you go charity hospitals, but we're going to put this in C tier because you can use this to leapfrog into pharmaceuticals, which is now probably the best institution because of the flat SOL it gives you, which helps a lot with qualifications, which kind of makes academia and egalitarianism a little bit worse. If you have available law passes, it will be really, really good, but this is one that's going to be, again, contextually driven by if you have available law passes. Almost all the A tier texts for society tech in general are going to be like S tier sometimes, and then B tier most of the time. And so it's really hard to rate. Whereas the power level or the researchability of like most of the industrial texts is relatively flat. These ones are highly variable. Romanticism's an interesting one. I think there is, I think on Qing specifically, you research this tech first because it allows you to go agrarianism, and on Qing, I think agrarianism is meta. I think it's actually the first tech you research. However, I think you do not actively research it on any other country. And so we're going to put it in C tier because in one situation it is the uberest of S tiers, and in every other situation it's really bad. And the reason being is Qing has an enormous amount of subsistence farms which are owned by aristocrats, and so the plus 50% aristocrat investment pool contribution efficiency, while most countries will benefit from this initially, usually it kind of wears off in the first like 5 to 10 years, so it wouldn't be worth going agrarianism specifically. However, China takes so long to get like fully up and running that this will give you the most investment pool possible, and so it's just off of the back of enabling agrarianism that it's so good. Next up, we have empiricism, which is going to be a really strong tech. We're actually going to jump back into the game to talk about empiricism and then stock exchange, which is the following one. But coming back in, empiricism is going to be a really good one because it unlocks notably public schools, which is going to be one of the better ones. But also, even if you don't have time to push for an institution, which is going to be often one of the things, it's going to give you 5% wealth education access, which is going to be quite nice, especially if you're struggling with qualifications. Like, it's not worth getting more construction if you can't get your places to employ up, but this is going to be a pretty big one. It's also going to unlock public schools, which is going to be the preferable education system that's going to give you 10% and also assimilation. I suppose that the religious schools are not too bad early on. I think there is a cap. I always confused if it's hospitals or religious schools that have a cap at 3. But for the most part, this one's going to be pretty good, especially if you can go public schools, and it's going to be nice. It also unlocks total separation, so if you wanted to go total separation, you can't do it until you unlock this. And so if you, in particular, really need schools and you don't want to do 2 laws, because if we come in here, like, sometimes you start off with state religion, right? And you don't want to law pass into freedom of conscience and then total separation later. In this case, you do want to actively research this tech, but a lot of times it's going to come down to, is this going to be giving us a law pass that we want immediately? The answer is, often not, but when it is, it's going to be kind of like S tier. So we're going to actually put this at the top of B tier for empiricism. For the next one, we're going to be talking about stock exchange. And stock exchange is the premium, uber, highest tier tech in the game now. It is the most researchable tech in the game. I think only Qing does not research it first if it's not available to you at the start of the game, and it's because of this 10% market access price impact. Let's actually pull up the spreadsheet for a moment. Okay, so looking at the spreadsheet, what it will do is it will take you from being, the base MAPI is 75%, and when you research stock exchange, you will go to 85% unless you're on traditionalism or you're not incorporated or there's other things. But what this will do is it will change prices. If you're kind of close to base price, if market price is base and you have either a glut or a shortage, it's going to change prices 10%. And this is going to be tremendously useful because it's like the equivalent of it's changing the price of the goods you are selling by increasing it by 10% is going to generate a lot more revenue from the building, or it's going to make the building a lot more positive, much more than 10%, because the buildings are about margins. Like if we take a look at like the industrial goods and we look at steel mills, if we increase the output of the steel mills price, for example, by 10% and also decrease the input by 10%, we will go up to about 5K on our output, right? And we will go down to, on Bessemer process, we will go down to about 3K on our input. And so we will move from our net of being 1,200 to our net being 2,000. And so this is such a huge difference, right? This is, a 66% increase in net output of our building just from getting an additional 10%. Or actually, sorry, by turning off the MAPI. We won't actually get that much. What we will get is the difference between 75 and this, which not quite 10%, but it is, you know, a pretty substantive, what is this, 7.5%, moving from an 18.8% differential to 11%. And so this is going to make all the buildings way more profitable. Also, if you are having slower economy in 1.5, this is a big reason why, because all the profits of all your buildings are crushed by when you are running, you know, an absolute glut of the good. When you are selling a ton of it, it's going to decrease the price and you're going to sell for less. And when you have a shortage of the good or the inputs not local, it's going to increase the price of the inputs, which is going to further, you know, hurt your bottom line. And so it's really, really hard to underemphasize how strong the stock exchange technology is. And it's just like, unless you have the situations where you don't research it are very, very, very specific. And it has to be literally like you're a one province state or you're only building in one state for quite a period of time. And nothing comes to mind other than maybe Krakow and, you know, Indian territories. But this is going to be the uberest of S tiers. And so let's come back into the browser and not look at the spreadsheet, not as glorious as it is, but instead return over here, and we're going to put stock exchange uberest of S tiers, empiricism at the top of B tier. Currency standard, I was actually really bullish on when I first made this tier list in 1.2. Now I just kind of think it sucks. One of the big reasons is it takes longer to pass laws, and so you can't really afford to go to per capita to proportional. But another thing is I started to realize much more how if you're on per capita, it's very, very difficult to go proportional taxation. All currency standards does is unlock this ability. So we're going to put it just ahead of international because I think there's maybe some scenarios where you want to go per capita, but I think there are very few. But this tech is useless. Or actually, this tech's it's probably more useful than currency standards, to be honest. The truth hurts. All right, next up is colonization, which is going to be situationally it's situationally going to be extraordinary for some countries, but unfortunately, you're really competing. I think I had this in S tier last time, or like high A tier, but now you're really competing with stock exchange. Almost everyone's going to research stock exchange first, and then a lot of the more backward countries are going to prefer to go for railroads rather than to colonize immediately. And then even the countries that don't start with colonization, that aren't backward, they're going to prefer, you know, the question is do you have law passes available, and are you going to prefer, you know, colonization being one of your really early law passes? And I think the answer is going to be, on a lot of countries, it's going to be no. Specifically, if you have a jingoist, you might want to pass it, but then your 3-year passing of or researching of this is not going to get there in time, you know. So it's one that's kind of hard to rank. We're going to put it in like kind of a solid B tier, where it's going to give you something that's really good. Colonization also just kind of you can't beat the UK to Kenya, and so being the first to the party is much less important than it was in previous patches, but it's still going to, you know, give you free real estate. So, and if it's free, it's for me. So we kind of take those. Next up, we're going to have banking, which is going to be a tech that you don't really research except for the purposes of clearing out the rest of the tier 1, you know, where you have additional tier 1 available, tier 1 techs, and you want to start researching the tier 2 techs, but you don't want to incur the malice. So we're going to put it kind of in the front edge of, you know, D tier here. We're going to put it behind international trade. That seems good. Next up is modern sewage, which is actually pretty useful, and is much more useful in 1.5 than it used to be. It is one of the kind of winners. It has gotten a lot better, and so with modern sewage, we are just going to kind of take a quick look here. Modern sewage is going to give you plus a 5 max construction progress, which wasn't there before. The land trade is pretty nice. The pollution effects reduction is nice, but you won't really have a lot of pollution when you can first research modern sewage, so it's not the biggest deal. But the plus 5 max construction sector, or construction sector max level, is going to be huge because you are building locally in certain states, and some states are way better than others to construct in. You know, like you have Silesia, which is just going to be absolutely insane in Germany, right? Because it has, you know, the full rainbow. You're going to have access to every resource. You would rather build, the 16th through 20th construction sector here than build the 1st through 5th construction sector somewhere else. And so what this allows you to do is allows you to better leverage, your prices, or it allows you to better make use of local prices in such a way that you end up saving, I did the math on it, I think it's somewhere between 2 and 5% on input costs, which just means more construction just by virtue of building your construction sectors in the right spots. Maybe it was a little bit more. That was the math for the throughput on the construction sectors. But this is going to make a big deal. It's going to be pretty nice, and it's also giving you some infrastructure and this sort of stuff. But it's still overall not that good at tech, but it's like way better than it used to be. So we're going to jump back into the browser, and we are going to rank this. I think we're going to put it in B tier, or maybe like higher C tier. In modern sewage is. We have our cheat sheet. We're going to put it at the very top of C tier here, which is kind of the evaluation to put, you're not ever researching it really early, but when you get to this block of text, kind of the C and D tier text, where you're like, I don't really care about any of these too much, this is going to be kind of the premium of the I don't care about this tech too much. Not like Postal Service, which is relatively useless. We're going to put it kind of at the back here. What it does is it increases, investment pool contribution of shopkeepers and farmers at a point where you don't really care about it that much, because you're trying to get these guys to not own it. And, while this is kind of okay late game, it also increases money reserve. But that's actually annoying because it kind of messes with your balance when you initially research it. But overall, this text, you're not going to actively research it at any point in time except to just... Actually, even, I think you just still research ahead of time and you just don't complete the tech instead of researching postal savings. So I just think you just, never research it. You never touch it. Okay. Central banking is actually going to be decently solid. It will allow you to bankroll countries. And so this is kind of the big one. It also gives you minus loan interest rate and plus minting, if I recall correctly. And you can also take on people's debts. So of the minus loan interest rates, this is going to be one of the better ones. And sometimes you want to get started on, making money moves and getting yourself a market, which is this is going to be important for. But I think it's modern sewage is going to be a little bit better still. And so I think that sometimes you research this, but it's not going to be super great. All right, next up we have Central Archives. Central Archives is conditionally insane, and it's going to be insanely useful on countries with really high populations. Countries like China that have a bunch of government administrations can make really good use of this tech. If you don't have that many government administrations, it's really not going to save you a lot of construction. But the huge pop countries, it's going to be very strong on. It unlocks the next level and also gives you base taxation capacity. And so we're going to put this kind of at the back of B tier here. It's really good sometimes. This can be a priority if you're playing Qing, but at other times or for most times, it's not going to be one you prioritize that much. A lot of countries, you can research it immediately, and this is not in the first 8 researches you make. Nationalism is going to be kind of an interesting one, in that it is going to be super researchable for countries that care about nationalism from the perspective of, you can do some formable stuff, so like Prussia, Italy, stuff like this, even the UK to some degree. But even then, for those countries, it's not like you're researching it first or anywhere close to first, and so we're going to put it in C tier, where it's like a conditional A or B, but for most countries, it's like a D tier tech, and so we're just kind of putting it in C tier, where, it also gives you 10% authority, but this, you're not researching it for the authority pretty much ever. So this is going to be where we put it. Next up, we have egalitarianism, and we will also talk about pharmaceuticals here when we jump into the game. Egalitarianism was really good, and I underrated this in 1.2, I think. Egalitarianism, what it really gives you is proportional taxation, and because you want to skip over per capita taxation, because if you have per capita taxation, it's very hard to pass proportional, you want to skip over, this is going to be a really good tax system. It also will, to some degree, when combined with labor, well, you need to get I forget exactly what the modifier it is. It might just be minus 25% pop attraction, but it also, there's a hidden modifier for trade unionists. So if you want the trade unionists to come up, you have to research both egalitarianism and labor movement. But egalitarianism is going to, the big one is the proportional taxation. It also allows you to go to universal suffrage. The extra max social security institution investment is not really that great. Minimum expected standard of living, not great. But we're here for the proportional taxation, which is going to be really, really good in the early game for a lot of countries, where it will generate you more money. And so this one is going to be a very, very strong tech, and we are going to put it in A tier. I think this is the first tech we're putting in A tier, just because proportional taxation is very strong. But it is in A tier in a sense that if you can pass proportional taxation, given the current climate of how many law passes you want to make and this type of stuff, this is an S tier. And if you cannot, then this falls down by the wayside, because if you can't make use of your ability to pass a new law, then it's not really going to be useful. Pharmaceuticals unlocks what is now the best institution, which is public health insurance, because it is going to give you just free standard of living, which has really good modifiers, but also decreased mortality and decreased effects of pollution. Very, very strong institution. Previously pharmaceuticals was like D tier, and you research it because it led into quinine. Now this is the cream. This is very, very strong. It's also going to be in A tier, and we're going to put it just ahead of egalitarianism. So let's jump back into the browser and get on our way. So we're going to put egalitarianism A tier, and then pharmaceuticals, and this is kind of going to be the situation where these are really, really strong, and they are strong, but they are unlocking law passes. And so if you have an opportunity to go for these laws, they're S tier, and if you don't, they're somewhere in the realm of B or C tier. They're not giving you anything if you're not able to pass the laws, which is kind of what we mean by when we said at the beginning that society tech will tend to be more polarized, how useful it is, where if you are working on other laws and you know you're not going to have time to research these, you don't research them, and if you have times, you absolutely research them. All right, so realism is a kind of a trash tech. We're going to put it ahead of postal savings here. It unlocks a little bit better stuff for your arts academy. I suppose to some degree allowing you to swap ownership is not a nothing burger of a thing, but it's pretty close. It's just not going to be a very strong tech. Dialectics is an interesting one. It unlocks philosophy departments on universities, which allow you to go from, if I'm not mistaken, 2 innovation to 3 innovation a tick. It also gives you plus 1 max level of education. And so dialectics is going to be one if you are building universities to economies of scale cap in whatever country. So this is going to be more relevant on countries that are backward and have high populations, allowing them to generate a lot of money. So this is going to be countries like Qing and also Japan. This can become a priority just as soon as you build up your first 31, 21, 51 type of university. It's going to give you a lot more innovation for your buck. And so we're going to put it in B tier. It's also going to be decent just as long as you have an education investment. So this one is going to be conditionally really strong. Most of the time it will just be solid if you have education, just giving you an additional level. Psychiatry, I think, gives you more diplomacy points. It's pretty useless. We're going to put it we're going to put it down here somewhere. I guess behind banking, but ahead of law enforcement, something like this, where it doesn't give you nothing, but it's pretty close. Organized, sports, it just gives you 10% authority. We're going to put it in here. And now Quinine. Quinine is a difficult one. Because our parameter is how likely are you to research it right when it becomes available. In a lot of situations, you will not research pharmaceuticals right away, and generally when you have researched pharmaceuticals, which leads into quinine, generally once you have researched pharmaceuticals, then you actually don't have a ton of really useful texts you want to pass. You've already gone somewhat into the tier 2 society tech, because remember, pharmaceuticals is a tier 2 society tech, and so if you've already gone into the tier 2 society tech and you've researched pharmaceuticals, you probably have the other tier 2 society tech that is going to give you good law passes. I suppose you could research pharmaceuticals in egalitarianism in some case. You probably already have the really good tier 2 industrial tech, and so almost want to put quinine up in S tier, because when it's available you probably don't have too many good things that you want to research, and so quinine is a very strange one, but we're going to put it down in B tier, because it itself will allow you to colonize a little bit more, but the colonization's slow. It's not going to really allow you to get cutoffs. If you could cut people off in Africa or secure yourself lines of colonization as a result of quinine, it would be extraordinarily strong. And this just isn't the case. You can colonize the severe malaria with quinine, but it's too slow to like really cut anyone off. It's not going to be the premium. The premium will happen later when you get malaria prevention. And so quinine is just kind of, it's this strange place of solid where often it will benefit from the fact that you don't have other tech researchable. In terms of power level, when you research quinine, the jump in your country's ability to perform, it should be in like C or D tier, but often you just don't have better options, and so we're going to have that one. Right there. Labor movement, we are going to put right ahead of central archives. Labor movement, the big one, is going to be actually a hidden modifier, which it's, combined with the other one. I forget the exact way that it works, and I probably should have figured it out before the video, but the main reason is not anything that it says here, although the stuff here is nice, but this kind of allows your trade unionists to demarginalize when you research both this and egalitarianism. And so this is the most significant reason to research labor movement. If your trade union is sitting at 2 to 3%, researching this and then bolstering the trade unionists will usually demarginalize them. And so this is conditionally a kind of one that you go for just for this purpose, but it does give you some stuff. It gives you an extra agitator slot, which is actually pretty nice. More workplace safety office institution is not really that useful because usually you will not be passing it that early, but restricted child labor law will be nice if you have really good laws at the start, because otherwise you probably will be busy passing other stuff. Regulatory bodies, again, probably when you can research labor movement, you probably have a bunch of other law passes you want to do, but reg bodies is solid, especially if you're running out of pops. Wage subsidies we don't research, we don't talk about, and then giving another party's kind of whatever, but in the broader context of what's going on, I think that the fact that you have to research egalitarianism to lead into this means that it will kind of be in a similar situation as quinine as well, where often you are getting it after you have like kind of your really good tier 2 production tech, and so maybe this, again, it's like tempting to put labor movement in like this S tier because it's in this strange situation, but we are going to put it instead in B tier. I think it's very solid, but is never like slam dunking kind of outstanding, and in the situation where it is really good, you have already passed a bunch of really good laws. It's like kind of narrow. You already passed a bunch of really good laws, and the trade unionist is at like 3% clout, and this will like bring them up if combined with a bolster, something like this. And so we're going to move labor movement, we're going to put it in B tier. I just wanted to kind of quickly note what corporate charters does. It gives you +1 max company, and joint stock companies gives you +1 company and urbanization per urban center. So let's jump into the browser and get everything on up there. Okay, so we put labor movement ahead of central archives, and now we have this interesting situation where, again, much like quinine, if you research corporate charters for the company, it's usually the case that you would want to research immediately after joint stock, whatever this is for the company, plus getting more urban centers, or it requires less urbanization to get an urban center, which is going to give you more of these. Generally, these are really profitable at this phase of the game. So we're going to put corporate charters at the top of A tier. Corporations are really, really good, and a big reason why we had to downgrade a bunch of the industrial tech is because you can research corporate charters and joint stock companies. This is a huge, blow, because being able to construct stuff, 20 to 35% faster, whatever the range is much more valuable than getting a slightly better PM a little bit earlier. Like, you would rather get the construction speed and then get the PM in most phases of the game because you have so many peasants, and so getting more buildings that are slightly less profitable is going to be better than, getting buildings that you're building to be more profitable. You would have to be running really, really severe population problem, but even then, for the construction to be less important. But even in that situation, the throughput is going to be really valuable. And so the companies are just very, very, very strong, unless you are in a situation where you just can't slot in any good companies because you just don't have enough economy going, in which case this is kind of like B or C tier or whatever. But yeah, the even then you can still try and push it. For joint stock companies, it's much going to be the similar kind of effect as quinine. if you research corporate, charters, you're probably going to be able to go joint stock companies immediately after, and it's probably going to be insane. So we're actually going to put this in S tier. It also is a stronger tech in the sense that it's also giving you more urban, the urban centers per level of urbanization. So in that sense, it's actually stronger than corporate charters. However, your first company is probably more marginally useful than your second company, and so like corporate charters will increase the power level of your country more than joint stock companies will when you research it. However, corporate charters has to compete with a lot more techs, and those joint stock companies doesn't have to compete with any of those techs in terms of prioritization, because all the techs that are better than corporate charters you research before corporate charters. So if you're researching corporate charters, you don't have those to research anymore, and so this is kind of why joint stock companies goes in S tier. And really, 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 stock exchange should just be up here. They go over the tier maker like symbol. Stock exchange is like I encourage people to give feedback and tell me when they think I'm wrong. I think I was really wrong the first time I made this about egalitarianism. I think I had it like in B or C tier, and it should have been S. Now I think it's properly in A. But like one thing that like if someone disagrees with me on, and I'm not buying it, which is stock exchange not being like the most premium tech in the game, like in just like categorically. Stock exchange is just absolutely insane. I'm just kind of going back through, the majority of this list here. The corporation companies, I think, are just, or the corporation techs, I think, are just also very, very strong. And they're a big reason why industrial technology kind of took a little bit of tumble in terms of prioritization, because getting a company is just very strong. It gives you, especially there are some countries that have really, really good companies, and it's even better on. But like when you just prioritize building a ton of wood and you go generic wood, and then iron and go generic iron, it's strong on every company. And then we have this block of the rest of the A and Bs, which are all conditionally like in a sort of S tier situation. And then most of the time, like in a C or D tier situation with a lot of these, pharmaceuticals, egalitarianism, colonization, and to some extent labor movement, all of these, and also empiricism, unlocking public education, all of these unlock new laws you can pass that are really good. But if you're already busy passing other laws, they're useless. Dialectics is contingent upon you having a ton of universities to be good, but it's going to be okay as long as you have an education institution. Labor movement's contingent on you having a powerful, trade unions. Central archives is contingent on you having really high pops. The only one that's actually they're just all hyper contingent, right? For most of the society tech, with the exception of the companies. And so this is going to be the state of affairs. And then we have like solid ones like modern sewage and central banking, which are almost always going to be like somewhat medium. And then we just have a pretty big glut of D tier tech that you never actively research ever under any circumstance, because they're just like awful. And so society tech is heavily stratified in terms of it's going to be like, under certain situations, like this is the state of affairs up here, where like all these guys come up to party, but then under certain situations they're all down in like D tier, and society tech looks barren. And so it's this weird ranking these is very strange because there's so much variance in terms of when stuff's useful, but I think keeping this in mind with the society tech is somewhat useful. Just thinking, how many law passes do I actually want to pass, and how much benefit do I get from unlocking the ability to pass this law is an important question to ask yourself when you're kind of thinking about society tech. But this has been the tier list. If you think I've made mistakes other than stock exchange, feel free to let me know. If you think stock exchange shouldn't be number one, then I don't know. I guess still let me know, but I'm just going to probably say you're wrong. Yeah, I mean, like, it's just, the thing you do now, whenever you start a game, you just, like, you come in, you're like, the first thing you do is you hit the technology button, you go over to society, and you're like, oh, do I start with stock exchange? Oh, I don't? I'm gonna click on it then, because there's no other thing I could possibly even think of doing. It even gives you, like, other stuff that's useful, too, other than this. We actually only talked about this market access price impact, like, that was the end. But it also gives a minus trade route bureaucracy cost, which is okay. It unlocks free trade, which is, like, medium, but but the biggest one is it unlocks the market liberal ideology so that it can actually roll, which is actually a huge deal, because rolling that on a landowner, if you want to like cheese it, you can, and if you don't want to cheese it, just eventually getting it is extraordinarily strong, and it can allow you to pass like a bunch of really good laws really quickly. And this is also behind stock exchange. Like, you think this isn't the best tech, get it out of here. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this one. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, do the YouTube algo thing, and etc. Mostly etc. Other than that, have a good one.